When we think of Superman, we think of him as a beacon of hope, able to achieve physical feats that no mere human could even think of achieving. From being faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, and being able to leap tall buildings in a single bound, the last son of Krypton has been portrayed so many times from comics to cartoons and to the iconic portrayal from the late Christopher Reeve from 1978 to 1987. And it should be noted that Reeve is the one that we associate the most with this role, as with most other actors that have been on screen in any role, this is an actor playing this role. When we look to Christopher Reeve playing Superman, you don't see an actor on screen. All you see is Superman. There had been many attempts to revive the Superman movie franchise from the cancelled Nicolas Cage project that would have been directed by Tim Burton. And knowing how Tim Burton can go to places, if Alice in Wonderland and Batman Returns is anything to go by, he'll go full-on Tim Burton. There was even one project where Supes would have gotten Lois Lane pregnant, died, then when the baby was born it would grow to adulthood in no time and have Superman's memories and personality.
What?
I think it's safe to say that movie would have aged poorly just weeks if the movie had been made, let alone decades. Before getting to Superman Returns, we would have seen a Superman-Batman movie where Bat would have been portrayed by Christian Bale and teaming up with Supes after the death of Alfred, and Clark and Lois had divorced. Superman Returns came to theaters in the summer of 2006 to a somewhat lukewarm reception. While people liked the performance of Brandon Routh in the Clark Kent side of his role, his Superman part just seemed to lack the personality and the dry wit that Christopher Reeve did with ease. Kevin Spacey stole the show by chewing the scene more than Gene Hackman did with his performance, which since this movie was implied to be a pseudo-sequel to 1980 Superman 2 and ignoring 3 and 4.
And of course, if you saw those movies, you'll know why they ignored them.
After the advent of 2005's Batman Begins, where Christopher Nolan had Bats portrayed in a more realistic setting, of which became the standard of comic book movies thereafter, it was then on the set of The Dark Knight Rises that co-writer David Goyer had this idea of reinventing Superman for a modern age. But like with any project, you have to be able to update a character for a modern audience without deviating from what made the character so likable to begin with. And when it was announced that Zack Snyder was approached to lead the project and relatively unknown British actor Henry Cavill chosen to play the legendary character, they set to bring the last son of Krypton back to the big screen in a way that he's never been seen before.
So, after 10 years, is this still as strong as before, or does it suffer from its own kryptonite? Well, time to find out, as we head back to look at Man of Steel.
The way Krypton is represented in being this grand, majestic world teeming with life is something that really separates this from the 1978 movie and various other iterations of Superman. Krypton had always been seen as this cold, ice-like barren wasteland which begs to question how it could even support life.
Whereas here, there is a beautiful and rich ecosystem.
It's interesting to see much more detail paid attention to the society of the Kryptonians with the sense of attire that seems to take notes from aristocracy from Earth's medieval history, even down to the chain metal undergarments that would be underneath their uniforms. We meet Jor-El, played this time by Russell Crowe as Krypton's chief scientist, and it's what you'd expect. He gives them stark warnings of Krypton's impending doom, not from an exploding star, but this time from harvesting the planet's core, and he needs to access the Codex.
The Kryptonian Codex is essentially manufactured birthing. Each person is assigned a role before birth, a politician, a warrior, and so forth.
Before this, Lara, Jor-El's wife, gives birth to Kal-El, Krypton's first naturally born child in centuries. Knowing that the planet is doomed, Jor-El opts to send his son to Earth, where he knows he'll be safe with the Codex encoded into his son's cells. Unsurprisingly, we get a repeat from Superman 1 with Zod and company being banished to the Phantom Zone for their attempted coup d'etat.
That and killing Jor-El probably didn't help their cause either. Also, if you thought the CD case that they were sealed into within Superman 1 and 2 looked ridiculous, then these questionable looking toys they get sealed into this time made me feel very awkward.
Before being imprisoned, Zod makes it clear that he will find her son.
Alright.
I will find him!
It's once Cal's ship reaches Earth is where the movie abandons the linear approach and goes non-linear, and we see Kal-El on a fishing boat, now under the identity of his Earth name, Clark Kent.
This is something that the movie would do at various points in jumping from the present back to the past and then the past back to the present, and it really gets jarring with regards to the pacing.
I appreciate that it's good to try a fresh approach to retell a story that everyone knows, but at the same time, when too many flashbacks occur, it can take you out of the story. Whereas in the Richard Donner movie, he fully knows his powers by the time he puts the suit on for the first time. With this story, he's still learning about what he's capable of even in his early 30s as he travels like a nomad, hopping from place to place, doing odd jobs and helping people out.
And in some cases, testing his patience. Folks, right or wrong, he had it coming.
What this movie did more of with Clark compared to previous portrayals is the loneliness and isolation that he feels in keeping distance from everyone, knowing what could go wrong if he were to be discovered and use his powers for the wrong reasons. This is emphasized more so by Jonathan Kent, played by Kevin Costner, who tries to guide a teenage Clark when his son feels conflicted in whether he should use his powers to help people.
Folks, if you're a good person and you see somebody struggling, your knee-jerk reaction is to go help them, and while it's good that Clark does this as well, every time he does it, it raises questions.
Then we come to the first meeting between Clark and Jor-El.
Well, it's a sophisticated holographic version of him.
This was a very profound moment between the two, as if you meet your real parent not knowing who or what you are, you have a multitude of questions, and knowing the confused childhood that Clark had, he had a lot of them. This is also when we're introduced to the new suit and we see Cal attempting to fly for the first time. What I like about the suit and what I think is clever on the writer's behalf is why not have the suit be made from the material as the undergarments of the Kryptonian armor? I mean, how else would his suit be able to withstand all the extremities that it has done in various media of the character? Seeing Clark struggle with his first attempts at flying before he understands that he needs to put more power into his liftoff in the same manner that a rocket like Thunderbird 1 would need to generate to lift off, and to see his grand tour around the world from various sites like the plains of Africa, the White Cliffs of Dover to the Grand Canyon was breathtaking, and to make it look like you're seeing it from his perspective was great. The way that Lois Lane is represented feels more assertive and more no-nonsense. That's not to say that Margot Kidder's version didn't do that, but Amy Adams' portrayal definitely feels more straight to the point and cuts through the noise. This, of course, leads to conflict with Lawrence Fishburne's Perry White. Perry has the sense of preserving good taste and not promoting a story of sensationalism in the context of Aliens Among Us or Guardian Angels. It's only when Zod arrives is that when the movie gets more serious. The way that he communicates his message around the world in various languages is greeted to what feels like a horror movie setting, to where TV screens around the world black out and then come back on with this eerie, unsettling noise in the background before he tells Kal-El to hand himself over, or the world faces the consequences. The final battle between Zod and Soups gets a lot of heat for the death and destruction it caused.
Whoa. Time out.
First off, Superman did not instigate this. Zod and his take over the world ploy began, and Superman merely tried to restrain him. Furthermore, if you have two aliens that have the power of demigods, what did you think was going to happen?
You couldn't resist, could you, Zach?
This scene delivered what the previous movies could only dream of from an effects perspective. This fight is on par with Goku vs Vegeta from Dragon Ball Z.
And probably the most controversial moment of the movie.
A lot of debate has been made in the 10 years since this movie whether Superman was right or wrong to kill Zod in the Metropolis train station.
It's complicated.
Ask yourself this. You are faced with the choice of allowing your nemesis to murder innocent bystanders whom you are being punished for stopping Krypton from returning, or you will make one of the toughest decisions you will ever make and kill the last of your kind in order to save a few innocents and maybe millions more. You feel the anger and sadness in knowing that Superman had to kill the last of his race, as he knew that Zod would never stop, as he only had death and destruction on his mind. The ending was a little too neatly wrapped up. Soups, now cracking jokes after crashing a government drone after having slain one of his own, did feel a little odd, as it seemed like he got over that event way too quickly. But that said, it's never specified how much time had passed since Zod's death, so for all we know, this could be weeks or possibly even months.
Well, even then, that's still too soon.
I would say that the writing still holds up well, aside from some inconsistencies from jumping back and forth from flashbacks to the present, and like I just mentioned, the ending was a little too idyllic. The British actor portrays the last son of Krypton with a lot of authentic honesty in being conflicted with a lot of uncertainty about himself until he learns the truth about who and what he is. Two of the best emotional raw acting displays is when he watches his father being killed by the tornado and then the realization settling in that he killed Zod to save the lives of innocents, which by the way, was completely improvised by him. Snyder liked it so much that he kept it in the movie. He has great chemistry with Russell Crowe's Jor-El and plays off Kevin Costner and Diane Lane equally well. The first man to play Krypton's chief scientist on the big screen since the late Marlon Brando. Crowe's performance as Kal-El's father has a lot of warmth and wisdom to him as he lays out the importance of what Kal-El's Kryptonian legacy means. He plays off of Michael Shannon's Zod exceedingly well as the two men that wanted the same survival of their race, but had very different ways of looking to achieve them. Only a handful of actors could have played the sober and sensible father that approached the idea of Clark's gifts as he grew up, and I like the down-to-earth sensibilities that Costner put into his performance as Superman's Earth father that openly embraced Clark as one of his own. If Kevin Costner had the very sensible discipline of how to raise Clark, then Diane Lane was definitely the more compassionate but just as protective parent in Martha Kent. Even though she was up against Zod and his minions that were 1,000 times her strength, she still defied them.
The craft he arrived in, where is it?
Go to hell.
Now that is a true mother.
Amy has a more reserved approach as the Daily Planet's ace reporter, but she approaches this role with just as much conviction. I think what I enjoy about her performance is how she's drawn to Clark and changes her perspective after hearing his story. If Jackie Cooper's portrayal as the Daily Planet's chief editor was basically the equivalent of Marvel's J. Jonah Jameson, then Fishburne's portrayal is definitely more reserved and soft-spoken. I had my reservations originally, as this is not necessarily a role you would think he would take after playing the philosophical Morpheus for so many years. And yet here he plays a man with a lot of common sense, intelligence, and someone that likes to put out the best news possible for his publication, while keeping within the boundaries of good taste. Terrence Stamp will always be Zod to so many generations with his eloquent delivery. With Michael Shannon's take on Krypton's general, he portrays a ruthless individual that will stay true to his convictions regardless of how harsh his actions may come across. And that's the thing about characters who are evil. They truly believe they are acting in the best interest of others no matter how messed up their logic is. Weta Digital were brought in to handle the effects for this second 21st century take on Superman. And if you know Weta Digital's resume from their work on 2011's Rise of the Planet of the Apes, 2009's Avatar, and 2013's Iron Man 3, then you know that they deliver on convincing photoreal visual effects. One attention to detail that's very subtle is when you look closely at Superman's face as he stands up to face the beam of the World Engine, and you can see glimpses of Christopher Reeve in there. It's very quick, blink and you miss it. But I do appreciate the fact that the producers had that put in there, as Chris was an amazing Superman, and to see that included was not only pleasing, but also a respectful nod. The best visual effects are anytime Soups is flying, to the use of his heat vision and to the final battle between him and Zod going all over Metropolis, up into space, and ending at the train station.
Folks, on one hand, it put the fight between Nuclear Man and Superman to shame. Not that that was hard considering how awful Superman 4 was.
The only constructive critique I will make was that I thought it was unnecessary for the muted color tone approach that they applied to the filter, as it did make the movie feel cold in places. With the Antarctic scenes, it's fine, because then it lends itself to that environment, but when you're seeing soups fly all over the world and to the fight scenes, it does do a disservice. Ugly Edits channel demonstrates how the movie could have looked without the bleak approach. So in summary, the effects brought Superman's powers to life in many ways that the original movies could only dream of. Hans Zimmer had a daunting task ahead of him. When you live in the shadow of John Williams' Superman score, you have some big shoes to fill. Considering the tremendous work he had accomplished in delivering for the Dark Knight trilogy, he was enlisted to bring life to the world of Superman with a much more theatrical and dramatic take on the Man of Steel. Now that's not to take anything away from what Williams did. His Superman March theme and the accompanying themes in the movies are iconic, and deservedly so. But this was not your daddy's Superman, and considering the tone was contrastingly different to what had been done with the previous series, this project in turn needed something that would set itself apart. And the theme, which is also known as "What are you going to do when you're not saving the world," is such a bombastic and uplifting dramatic piece. It starts off very slow with an almost somber piano piece in a way of reflecting Clark's loneliness. It's once it begins to pick up the pace with the mighty roar that you could envision with Superman taking to the skies. One piece that does this masterfully is when he learns to fly for the first time and you feel the euphoric experience with Clark as the score complements what he is feeling. The theme represents Superman as the people see him in this movie. They see him as hope, someone they can look to when they need help the most. Everyone longs for heroes that they can look up to and believe in, and Hans Zimmer accomplished this flawlessly with this score. Man of Steel grossed a profit of $668 million against a budget of $200 million to $225 million. Put in 10 years of inflation and the profit would now be $863 million. It took $116.6 million in its opening weekend, making it 2013's third highest behind Iron Man 3's $174.1 million, and it earned $74 million on its opening weekend in 24 countries. Despite the good box office return, it garnered mixed reviews. Richard Roper of the Chicago Sun-Times said that Man of Steel covered no new ground with regards to Superman films, and instead were plunged back into a mostly underwhelming film with underdeveloped characters and supercharged fight scenes that drag on and offer nothing new in the way of special effects creativity. Kofi Outlaw, editor-in-chief at Screen Rant, gave Man of Steel a 4 out of 5 star review, stating that Man of Steel has more than earned its keep and deserves to be the iconic Superman movie for a whole new generation. He would go on to name Man of Steel the best superhero movie of 2013. Despite the mixed press for the movie, Henry Cavill was praised for his performance as Superman, even winning an MTV Movie Award for Best Hero. Man of Steel would be followed with 2016's Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice that garnered equally mixed press, if not more so, for the way that the titular characters came off as hypocrites to one another, and the way the Martha scene became an instant meme to where internet comic artists would throw bats off his game whenever someone mentioned Martha.
And that got old real quick.
This was then followed with the very lukewarm reception for 2017's Justice League and possibly one of the worst CG animations for Henry Cavill's lip. Thankfully, this movie was remedied with the Zack Snyder cut of Justice League in 2021 that ended up being 4 hours plus, but it did manage to fix some aspects in keeping more with the tone that he established with Man of Steel. Henry reprised his role once more as an uncredited cameo at the end of 2022's Black Adam in a mid-credits scene. Unfortunately, this would not progress further as the DC Cinematic Universe was rebooted, with James Gunn essentially becoming DC's equivalent to Marvel's Kevin Feige.
Since 2013, the movie has been enjoyed on DVD, Blu-ray, and 4K. I'm MJ Knight, and this was Man of Steel.